Afghanistan is a country located in the middle of Asia. Because of where it sits, people have passed through it for thousands of years. The Hindu Kush is a vast, rugged mountain range in Central and South Asia, stretching across Afghanistan into Pakistan and Tajikistan, forming a western extension of the Himalayas. Because of this, people could not travel anywhere they wanted. They had to move through narrow valleys and mountain passes. Over time, these paths became important. Long ago, traders traveled along these paths carrying silk, food, and tools. They also shared ideas, stories, and beliefs. These paths became part of a large trade network called the Silk Road. The Silk Road was not just one single road, it was many connected routes that stretched across continents. Afghanistan sat right in the middle of this network. As time passed, these paths turned into roads. Roads were no longer just used for travel. They became important for trade, communication, and control. The mountains tell a beautiful but silent story of how nature plays a key part in the development of society. They don't just stand in the background, they guide movement, protect cultures, isolate communities, and quietly decide the pace of progress. Some stories are hard to hear, not because they're exaggerated, but because they're real. This is not a rumor, and this is not just one single isolated case. It is a pattern documented by journalists, humanitarian organizations, and human rights investigators over many years. The practice is known as bachabazi. The phrase is often translated as boy play, but that translation hides the reality. According to multiple investigations, boys often between the ages of 10 and 18 are taken from impoverished families, orphanages, or the streets. They are dressed up in women's clothing, and they are made to perform dances for adult men. In many documented cases, these boys are then subjected to sexual abuse by individuals who hold social, political, or military power. Reports indicate that this practice occurred most frequently in Afghanistan, as well as in parts of Central Asia. Human rights organizations describe bachabazi as organized and sustained by power. It is not accidental, and it's not informal. Investigators emphasize that this practice is not related to a sexual orientation. It is not a religious teaching, and it's not recognized as a legitimate cultural tradition. It is a form of exploitation. Experts note that this practice relies on extreme power imbalance. It also relies on silence and the absence of accountability. Decades of conflict in the region have weakened the institutions that are meant to protect children. Families have been displaced, local governance has fractured, law enforcement has often been compromised. In these conditions, power has concentrated in the hands of armed groups and local authorities. When legal oversight breaks down, abuse becomes easier to hide. Investigators report that victims often have no safe way of reporting what's happening. To understand how this abuse persists, investigators point to the conditions in which it occurs. For more than 40 years, Afghanistan has experienced near-continuous conflict. Foreign intervention, civil war, and insurgency have repeatedly disrupted national governance. As a result, long-term development has been limited. Schools, healthcare systems, courts, and child protection services are often damaged, underfunded, and inaccessible, particularly outside of major cities. In many areas, formal state authority has been inconsistent. Power has shifted between armed groups, local authorities, and informal networks. Humanitarian organizations report that prolonged conflict has also weakened public trust in institutions. When legal systems are unreliable or unsafe to access, abuse is less likely to be reported and more difficult to prevent. Conflict does not cause exploitation, but it creates conditions in which exploitation is easier to conceal and harder to challenge. In some cases, local police or officials are often implicated. Families may depend on the very individuals responsible for the abuse for protection, employment, or access to basic resources. Refusal can carry serious consequences, including threats to safety or survival. In many cases, social stigma is placed on the child rather than the perpetrator. Advocacy groups warn that this stigma discourages reporting and allows abuse to continue. After returning to power, the Taliban publicly prohibited bachabazi. Official statements condemned the practice, and some enforcement actions were reported. However, independent observers say enforcement has been inconsistent. Human rights organizations report that abuse has continued, often driven underground and carried out with greater secrecy. Experts caution that formal bans alone do not guarantee protection when victims lack access to independent courts, safe reporting channels, or support services. For survivors, the long-term effects can be severe. Mental health professionals report high rates of trauma, including anxiety, depression, and difficulty forming trust. Some victims are abandoned once they reach adulthood, others remain vulnerable to continued exploitation. Researchers emphasize that this does not excuse later harm. It underscores the lasting damage caused when abuse is ignored, denied, or left unresolved. The issue persists in part because it happens outside of public view, and because it challenges assumptions about what abuse looks like and who is responsible. The question is not whether these reports exist. The question is how much silence allows them to continue.